At an underground gathering in the city, I unexpectedly encountered my wife, not just casually, but in a cozy setting where furtive glances held deeper meanings. In the crowd, she was relaxed and laughing until our eyes locked. The instant he saw me, his smile vanished, as if it had been wiped out by an unseen force. She stiffened, motionless, as if time stood still around her. That instant, a part of me shattered, but what haunts me isn't merely the sight of her at the party. Instead, it was the tormenting process of piecing together the fragments in our marriage that had led to the revelation of a disturbing truth. I once believed our life was nearly flawless, embodying a content family and warm home environment. Lately, though, things have changed. There's been an unusual evasiveness in her eyes, weak explanations, and growing distance between us. I talked myself into believing it was mere paranoia, attributing it to work stress and the erosion that time takes on any bond. However, that sight clarified everything. It wasn't stress or exhaustion, it was treachery. Not just any betrayal, but one that ran profound and malicious. For in that moment, I realized she had been involved with others who seemed to know more than me. This wasn't the first instance. Her secret life, a life I could never have envisioned, was tearing apart what we had constructed together. The ensuing emotion was a tumultuous cocktail of anger, pain, and an unquenchable thirst for truth. The pain of being the last to comprehend the situation, the humiliation of being deceived for so long, and the animosity towards those hiding their tracks. I needed answers. She needed to comprehend her motivations, to uncover what truly lay behind the facade. Because deep down, I knew there was something even more devastating hidden. Pondering the situation, a single query echoed in my mind. What other secrets were concealed from me? And above all, how would I react once I discovered the truth? In tranquil and inviting Philadelphia, where cobblestone streets and ancient mansions radiate history, resided a duo who, to onlookers, embodied perfection. Richard, a prestigious lawyer recognized for his unwavering ethics and devotion to honesty, was the type of man who treated both his profession and family with gravitas. Since meeting Emily, his spouse, he had been committed to constructing a stable home filled with warmth and reverence. Emily, in response, was the embodiment of social grace, beautiful, charming, devoted mother, and nurturing wife. Combined, they were the epitome of the ideal couple, the one that all admired and coveted. However, like many tales steeped in magic, darkness lurked beneath their gleaming facade. The house they inhabited, nestled in one of the city's most coveted neighborhoods, embodied the stability Richard had consistently yearned for. A meticulously maintained garden filled with flowers tended by Emily, along with a harmonious blend of traditional and contemporary interiors, provided an atmosphere of comfort and sophistication. This house served as a sanctuary for Richard following his arduous court days, offering him respite from the outside world. Yet, over the recent months, Richard has become aware of minor alterations in Emily's behavior. Details that once went unnoticed now piqued his interest. Initially, it was the covert phone conversations she held when he wasn't present, her hushed tones and deliberate choice of words suggesting secrets hidden from him. This was followed by more frequent excursions for supposed friend meetings or shopping trips, which grew longer and less elaborated upon. Initially, Richard attempted to quell his doubts. Richard found it hard to accept the idea that the woman he adored, the mother of his child, might be concealing secrets from him. Contrary to her previous constant presence at home, Emily now appeared restless and preoccupied, as if her thoughts were elsewhere most of the time. However, her attentiveness towards their 4-year-old son, Jack, remained unchanged. Yet, a chasm seemed to be growing between Richard and Emily, with their once effortless conversations now filled with long silences and an air of formality. Richard attempted to alleviate the tension, discussing work and current events, but Emily responded in a robotic manner, suggesting she was merely complying with some unspoken duty. The vibrant city of Philadelphia, with its bustling streets and rich history, had always been the ideal setting for Richard's cherished love narrative. Having grown up there, he was intimately familiar with every nook and cranny, finding comfort and confidence within its boundaries. Recently, familiar streets appeared altered, concealing mysteries in their darkness, for Emily, a Philadelphian daughter, and Richard, They envisioned a robust history together, as enduring as the antique edifices encircling the city. Yet, Emily's metamorphosis mirrored Amanda's entrance into her life, a classmate from Emily's book club. Amanda was Emily's polar opposite, outgoing, always commanding attention, and exhibiting flamboyant conduct. The two's growing bond resulted in Emily behaving uncharacteristically. She, who cherished simplicity and closeness, now showed an inclination towards nightlife and mingling with strangers, a strange shift from her usual demeanor. Richard rationalized this transformation as Amanda's influence. He convinced himself it was merely a transient phase that would fade away. However, over time, his suspicions deepened into a nagging sense of unease. Nights would find Richard waking up and discovering Emily absent from their shared bed. She claimed to be in the living room, engrossed in reading or watching television, but her countenance was always taut with anxiety, hinting at concealed secrets. Despite his efforts to remain sane and concentrate on work, Emily appeared more and more detached. Her affectionate gestures were less frequent, her embraces colder. Even conversations, once frequent over trivial matters such as movie choices or wall colors, had become rare. There was no longer that bond between them, that mutual understanding that characterized their relationship. To Richard, it felt like an unseen abyss had developed between them, and he couldn't determine its origin. Unaware of his parents' tension, Jack remained a source of comfort for Richard. However, even there, something nagged at him. Emily, who had always been a devoted mother, seemed disinterested in some aspects of Jack's life. Occasionally, she gazed at the boy with an enigmatic expression, a mix of remorse and sorrow. Richard observed this, yet held back from inquiring. There was something about Emily that induced apprehension within him, a worry that probing too deeply might reveal a reality he wasn't ready to confront. As weeks rolled by, Richard's suspicions intensified. He started noticing recurring events, minor occurrences that he had initially overlooked. Emily's schedule, her excuses, her new group of acquaintances, everything pointed towards defiance against him. Then, on a stormy afternoon, while reviewing papers in his home office, he found a note in Emily's coat pocket. It was a reminder for an 8 p.m. rendezvous. No name, no location, just a time. And it was at this moment that Richard decided to trail her that night. He wasn't sure what he sought, but his intuition told him that the note held the answer to the mystery unfolding. That night marked the commencement of a transformative voyage for Richard and his family, filled with discovery, pain, and revelations that would indelibly alter their lives. Pursuing Emily through the city streets of Philadelphia, Richard was not merely seeking answers. He was preparing to encounter a reality that would compel him to challenge everything he thought about his marriage, his spouse, and even himself. When Emily mentioned she was attending another meeting, Richard recognized there was no turning back. He resolved to trail his wife, unveiling the truth that had tormented him for so long. Minutes seemed endless as he waited for her to depart. Upon seeing her leave, dressed more extravagantly than customary, he hesitated briefly before pursuing her, maintaining a distance to avoid detection. The Philadelphia sky was threatening with storm clouds, but Richard paid little heed to the weather. Richard's thoughts were swirling, attempting to guess the contents of his discovery. Emily hurried along, keeping her head low, seemingly wanting to evade observation. When she eventually halted before a nondescript building devoid of any identifying symbols, Richard identified it due to prior knowledge. It was an elusive club, notorious for catering to those demanding secrecy, where hidden gatherings occurred beyond the gaze of curious onlookers. He bided his time until she went in, taking deep breaths to suppress his apprehension. Upon crossing the threshold, Richard felt a wave of discomfort. The atmosphere was refined yet held an air of clandestine activities, as if all present were concealing something. It resonated with soft melodies, muffled chuckles, and a sense that time moved differently within these walls. Emily was there, enveloped by strangers to him. An intimacy existed between them, suggesting a long-standing friendship. He observed her from a distance, endeavoring to decipher her actions. In every movement, every chuckle, she appeared detached from the woman he recognized. The air carried tension, and the sensation of treachery intensified with each passing moment. Richard sensed something amiss in that setting. Individuals cast furtive glances, murmured to one another, and he felt his presence was soon to be exposed. However, prior to making a decision on action, an unforeseen event transpired. Emily was escorted to a secluded part of the club, and Richard trailed her as covertly as feasible. There, he observed her being welcomed by a man who seemed to command attention. They engaged in brief conversation before Emily ascended to the second floor, where the lighting was dimmer and the sound softer. Richard advanced, his pulse racing, attempting to comprehend what was unfolding. When he eventually reached the stairs, he encountered a scene that left him motionless. Standing before Richard, Emily chuckled at the man's words, but when he caught sight of the man's face, his world crumbled. It was someone familiar, someone he hadn't envisioned being connected to Emily. The pair appeared intimate, suggesting a past relationship. Their proximity was indisputable. The man caressed Emily's face with a familiarity that instilled in Richard an anger hitherto unknown. He felt an immediate urge to confront them yet hesitated, recognizing the need for more facts before accusations were made. He needed assurance of the situation before questioning Emily. Thus, he remained a spectator, battling his instincts to intervene. As time passed, Richard became aware of something even more unsettling. The dialogue between Emily and the man revolved around a specific subject, a secret they both concealed from him. They spoke cryptically about a third person. Each reference chilled Richard's blood until he grasped the truth. The topic of their cautious discussions was Jack, their son. Pieces were falling into place cruelly, making sense of Emily's distance, her distant nights even with Jack, and hollow excuses. It dawned on him that Emily's secret wasn't merely a matter of physical infidelity. Something far more profound was at play, capable of shattering not only their marriage, but their entire family. Richard felt as though the ground gave way beneath his feet, knowing the confirmation of his fear was imminent, the weight of it almost unbearable. Yet, he understood he must remain composed, that action wasn't yet required. He quietly withdrew, absorbing his discovery and planning his subsequent steps. I realized the worst was still to come, and I needed to brace myself for whatever it held. As Richard exited the club that night, his countenance had changed. The individual who stepped in, brimming with suspicion and doubt, emerged with an indelible conviction that would torment him eternally. The disclosure made that night marked the commencement of a truth on the verge of unveiling, a truth he sensed would alter everything. Driving home, Richard couldn't shake off the phrases he heard, the visuals he saw from his memory. A part within him was aware of the impending revelation of a terrible truth, yet another part stubbornly denied it. He needed proof, required confronting Emily in such a way that she could not refute her secrets. Most importantly, he needed to comprehend how this had unfolded before his very eyes, unnoticed. Richard was unsure about his next encounter with Emily, but knew nothing would ever be as it was before. What transpired at the club foreshadowed a revelation he dreaded more than anything, and what awaited him would push the boundaries of his sanity and love to their extremes. The day following the quiet standoff at the club, Richard awoke under a burden on his chest, as if the impending disclosure weighed upon every cell in his body. Emily was in the kitchen, making coffee as usual, giving no indication of any alteration. Yet to Richard, the world had shifted entirely. He observed her from afar. Each motion she made carried an unspoken purpose he felt compelled to decode. The casual manner in which she adhered to her daily routine was almost provocative, given the chaos brewing within him. Driven to confirm his suspicions definitively, Richard seized the opportunity when Emily stepped out for a walk with Jack to sift through his personal belongings. There was an enigma lurking behind her eyes last night, one that hinted at secrets beyond simple questionable interactions. Hidden beneath a pile of old documents and long-forgotten correspondence, he discovered a yellow envelope bearing a name unfamiliar to him. His hands trembled as he unfolded the letter, its contents shattering a paternity test. Performed shortly after Jack's birth, the results were crushing. Richard wasn't biologically Jack's father. The truth struck him like a punch to the gut, robbing him of breath. Everything he held dear, his entire life, disintegrated before that document. Fury surged through his veins, intermingling with a numbing agony. How could Emily harbor such a damaging secret for so long? How could she face him and Jack daily, knowing it was all deceit? Upon Emily's return with Jack, the room hummed with unspoken tension. Richard waited for the boy to retreat to his bedroom before addressing her. He braced himself for a conversation that would irrevocably alter their lives, yet there was no way to evade it. Clutching the envelope, he ventured into the room where Emily awaited. Upon revealing the test, her eyes welled with tears. "It's time for an explanation," Richard asserted, maintaining a calm and composed tone despite the tumultuous emotions surging within him. Emily glanced at the document in her grasp, understanding that evasion was no longer an option. She attempted to speak, but the words refused to leave her throat. Richard fixed her with an intensity she had never witnessed before. After a prolonged silence that felt like an eternity, she managed to whisper, "Richard, I can clarify." "Clarify?" she questioned. "How can you clarify? How can you rationalize such a prolonged deception?" His anger was barely contained. "I'm not Jack's biological father." "Who then, Emily? Who is our son's true biological father?" Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she searched for the right words. "I never desired this situation to arise. It was a catastrophe, an unforgivable error. But Jack, he is still our son, Richard. Regardless of what this test suggests, you have always been his father in every sense." "A catastrophe?" Richard echoed, disbelieving. "You concealed this truth for 4 years," you asserted. "4 years?" I responded, surprised. "I thought Jack was your son, that we formed a family together." "Who is the biological father, Emily?" you inquired, demanding an answer. Taking a deep breath, Emily revealed, "It's David," she admitted softly. "David, the man I was with last night. He's Jack's biological father." The disclosure about Jack's real parentage struck Richard like a knife. "David, someone I considered a friend and an acquaintance of mine, you were with him all this time?" you exclaimed in disgust. Emily shook her head, desperate to make you understand. "It was only once, Richard. It happened before we wed. I never wanted him to know. I never intended for it to get out of hand. But when Jack was born, I knew. I realized he wasn't yours. You deceived me, you concealed everything. You made me think we were a family, that all was well, while harboring this vile secret." Richard trembled with anger. "You sacrificed our marriage, our shared life, over one night with him." Emily attempted to approach Richard, but he moved away. "I loved you, Richard. Truly I did. I never wished for this truth to surface, never wanted you to learn it." Richard roared, feeling alienated in his own existence. "You've destroyed everything." "And David, is he aware? Does he know Jack is his son?" Emily paused briefly before answering. "He knows. He was made aware some time ago, but we chose not to disclose anything, to keep it hidden between us. We believed this would be best." The revelation proved the final blow. Richard remained quiet, grappling with the immense weight of the betrayal. He contemplated Jack, the boy he had brought up as his own son. How could Richard remain the loving father he'd always been, when aware that the son was birthed from such a deep-rooted deception? A heavy silence stretched between Richard and Emily, time seeming to stand still. The betrayal Richard endured was immense, yet it was the realization that Jack, his cherished child, wasn't biologically his that struck him the hardest. Richard, who had always been a devoted father, now found everything to be an unfair jest. Each moment with Jack, every smile, every embrace, weighed heavily with unbearable pain. How could he remain the father he once was, knowing the truth that had engulfed him? Emily, in turn, was heartbroken. She understood she'd destroyed everything, that there were no excuses or explanations that could mend what had been broken. Yet she also knew that despite it all, she still loved Richard. She hadn't foreseen her actions would escalate to such an extent, and now all she yearned for was a chance to mend the damage, despite its seeming insurmountability. "Richard," Emily initiated, her voice quivering, "I realize I caused you a pain that might be beyond forgiveness. But Jack adores you, sees you as his father. In his eyes, you're the only father he has ever known. I can't reverse what transpired, but we can navigate this for Jack's sake." Richard gazed at Emily with a blend of disbelief and dejection. Recover from this? How am I supposed to recover, Emily? How am I supposed to view Jack in the same light, knowing what I now understand? Emily advanced, attempting to meet Richard's gaze. Because your feelings for Jack have remained unaltered. He is still the very boy you've always cherished, the one you nurtured. You are his father, Richard, regardless of what has occurred. He needs you, now more than ever. Emily's words were accurate, yet they offered no solace. Richard's affection for Jack remained steadfast, yet the specter of deceit cast a gloom over his world. He pondered if he could ever reconcile, if he could ever forgive Emily or himself for not recognizing it earlier. I must contemplate, he stated eventually, his voice laden with pain and fatigue. I require time to comprehend this fully, to determine my course of action. Yet one aspect is clear, Emily. Our lives will never resemble their previous state. Emily gave a silent nod, comprehending that words then would be futile. She watched Richard depart the room, taking with him not only the weathered parchment, but also fragments of a life he believed he had constructed. She knew that what was shattered would not be effortlessly restored, perhaps never to be mended. But she also recognized that she needed to battle, not just for herself, but for Jack, and for the man she still cherished, in spite of everything. As Richard departed the house, the impending storm finally unleashed its fury over Philadelphia. The drumming of heavy rain on the windows mirrored the tumult in his spirit. He meandered aimlessly down slick streets, searching for resolution amidst the clamor of his thoughts. All he had constructed seemed to disintegrate, and he was acutely aware that once the tempest subsided, he would confront a future he never fathomed. In a deserted park, Richard switched off the engine and pressed his head against the steering wheel. He understood that the choice he must make in the ensuing days would shape not only the destiny of his marriage, but also Jack's. He needed to choose between what was just and what his heart urged, but the two appeared incompatible. The truth had surfaced, yet the injuries it inflicted ran deep, and the journey to healing seemed elusive and ambiguous. The storm persisted, saturating the city, but within Richard, disarray remained unabated. The disclosure of Emily's secret left him shattered, confronting the fallout solo, aware that once the rain abated, he must re-enter his home to confront the impending truth. The downpour ceased upon Richard's return home, yet the burden within him was heavier than ever. Upon entry, the house was quiet. Emily had tucked Jack into bed, and a soothing ambience filled the living room. She sat on the couch, her eyes bloodshot from weeping. Despite the familiar surroundings, everything was irrevocably altered. Richard settled in the opposite chair, speechless. They both understood that their ensuing discussion would be pivotal, yet neither knew how to initiate it. The silence between them grew dense with unspoken words until Emily eventually breached the gap. I recognize your pain, Richard, she began, her voice hushed and tinged with remorse. I cannot rectify my actions, and I bear the consequences now. I've betrayed you in every conceivable way, but remember, Jack, he isn't responsible for this mess. He needs you more than ever. With a blend of fury and sorrow, Richard gazed at Emily. You seem to believe it's simple, that I can simply erase the past and move on as if nothing transpired. But how? How can I when Jack is a reminder of the falsehood we've constructed? After a moment of silence, Emily spoke. I acknowledge it's not easy, Richard, and I don't presume it will be. But you are the father Jack knows. You've been present for every significant milestone in his life. Biology does not dictate your role in his life. What matters is the love you have for him, the time you've spent together. Do not let my error erode that bond. Emily's words echoed deeply within Richard, striking a truth he had been trying to ignore. He recognized that, despite everything, his bond with Jack was genuine. Richard was Jack's teacher on how to ride a bike, his aide in schoolwork, and a comfort during nightmares. Yet, biologically, Jack was not his son. But this fact presented a moral quandary he couldn't unravel. How could Richard continue being Jack's father when another man was the biological one? How could he pretend nothing had altered, live with a lie, while he felt shattered inside? And yet, how could he abandon the boy he considered his own? This dilemma troubled Richard deeply, Knowing any decision would bring severe repercussions. You're asking me to disregard everything, Richard expressed eventually. To persist in a lie for the greater good. But what about me, Emily? How can I continue living like this? How can I trust you again? How can I trust myself, knowing I've been deceived for so long? Emily felt the gravity of Richard's words, understanding their weight. I don't anticipate your forgiveness, Richard. I merely hope you consider what's best for Jack. If you require time or distance, I comprehend. Yet, I implore you not to act hastily. Jack warrants it, having you in his life. Richard rose, finding it hard to stay put anymore. He walked the room, seeking a path through the labyrinth of feelings confining him. Each step resonated with a quandary gnawing at him, balancing the yearning to shield Jack, to be the father he requires, against the intolerable agony of betrayal, questioning if he'll ever surmount what he uncovered. I must deliberate, he echoed, mostly addressing his thoughts. I need time to comprehend this fully, to decide on what is just. Emily nodded, aware that this duration could mean the dissolution of their marriage. She watched him gather his coat and leave, uncertain if he'd return. The slamming door echoed like the finality of an incomplete, agonizing statement. Once more, Richard aimlessly departed. He understood that making such a critical decision required time, yet he also recognized his dwindling clock. Jack needed the truth, but how could it be delivered without shattering him? How could Richard gaze into the mirror and recognize himself as a father if he chose to abandon ship? The ethical quandary gnawing at him was suffocating, and Richard felt cornered with no escape. As he wandered Philadelphia's streets, Richard pondered his courtroom victories, the tough decisions he'd guided others through. However, none of it equipped him for a choice like this. He was a man versed in facts, indisputable truths, but now he found himself ensnared in a conundrum where there were no straightforward answers, only outcomes. Night's gloom echoed his soul's turmoil, and Richard comprehended that whatever course he chose, his life would never revert to its old self. Jack, Emily, and himself would all bear the indelible imprint of this revelation. Yet, in spite of the challenge, Richard acknowledged that a resolution was inevitable. A resolution that wouldn't merely shape his family's destiny, but also define him as an individual and a father. 3 weeks elapsed since Richard departed from home that night. Each day, time stretched sluggishly, unveiling fresh burdens and queries he struggled to manage. During this interval, Richard distanced himself from all connections, wrestling with the conundrum gripping him. Emily made efforts to reach out, but remained unanswered. He required solitude to gauge the magnitude of what unfolded and choose a path forward. Eventually, on a frosty afternoon, Richard took the step that would transform everything. Returning home, he was resolved to tackle what he had evaded for weeks. Upon entering, the house appeared unchanged, but the ambience was tense, as if the air was dense and weighty. Emily was stationed in the living room, poised, aware that the climactic moment had dawned. Jack was engrossed in his room, unaware of the tempest raging through his parents' lives. Richard sat opposite Emily, regardingly looking at her with an expression that embodied sorrow and acceptance. I've given much thought to everything, he initiated, his tone soft and steady. To you, to Jack, to what this implies for us. Emily held her breath, anticipating the verdict she knew was impending. So, what is your decision, Richard? His gaze shifted to the floor momentarily, as if seeking the fortitude to proceed. I can't continue in this, Emily. Not after everything. What you did, the deception you maintained. It's something I can't pardon. Yet, Jack, he is blameless amidst it all. Emily sighed, torn between despair and compassion. I realize, she murmured, that this moment has been inevitable. You are a good man, Richard. In response, he stated, his voice emotionless, it makes no difference now. I'll be filing for divorce, but I wish Jack to grasp the truth in a manner he can comprehend. He deserves the truth, yet shouldn't bear the burden of this secret. I'll remain in his life, but you and I both know our relationship has reached its end. Emily nodded, tears trickling silently down her cheeks. I will accept whatever you decide, Richard. My only concern is that Jack has a father, that he is cherished and nurtured. Richard seemed to falter as he stood up, pausing when he heard the front door open. David stepped into the room, his sudden appearance causing a chill in the air. He looked at Richard with a mix of shame and remorse. David spoke softly, admitting he arrived due to Emily's revelation about your knowledge. I recognize there's no justification for my actions, he stated, yet I wish to be present as you determine Jack's fate. Richard glared at David, harboring simmering anger yet unwavering resolve. Although biologically you are his father, Jack is my son. I shall be his guardian, and you will keep your distance. If you dare meddle in his life, I vow to take whatever measures required to ensure you'll never come near him again. He doesn't require two parents. He needs consistency, something you cannot provide. David bowed his head, submitting to the truth Richard presented. The air was thick with tension. Emily understood that this moment marked the dissolution of everything she nurtured, every lie she upheld. When David departed, Richard addressed her one last time. I hope someday you can find forgiveness for yourself, Emily, he said, his voice echoing with bitterness and sorrow. I can't be a part of this path you've chosen. Our narrative concludes here. Without seeking a reaction, Richard departed the dwelling, cognizant that he was abandoning a segment of his existence that couldn't be refashioned. He understood that the course ahead would be challenging, that Jack would harbor queries, and that the wounds of the deception would remain etched on him perpetually. Yet, he also recognized he was making the appropriate decision, the tough but essential one. In the ensuing months, Richard dedicated himself to restoring his life, prioritizing Jack's welfare in his capacity as a father. He succeeded in keeping the truth concealed, protecting Jack from the weight of knowing his biological parentage. Emily, accordingly, acknowledged the repercussions of her actions, now bearing Richard's absence and the demise of the home she had dismantled. She recognized that her life would no longer be familiar, and that the pain of the betrayal she inflicted would endure indefinitely. The finale was sour for all, but it also offered closure. Richard, despite being overcome by sorrow, managed to muster resilience, focusing on becoming the best father he could be to Jack. Conversely, Emily wrestled with regret over her actions and their consequences. Ultimately, everyone bore the cost of their choices, and the truth, though painful, implied a chance for a fresh start, albeit enveloped in ambiguity.